And we are. There we go. We're back again. It's Thursday morning, February 27th, 2025, here in Vermont in the House Transportation Committee. We have a returning witness. Joel Perigo has been with us a few times, and now we're here to continue our stormwater discussions, etc. this morning. So I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and carry us forward.
Thank you. For the record, I am Joel Perigo. I'm with VTrans, the Municipal Assistance Program Manager. So generally, any of the funding making its way into municipalities through VTrans comes through our shop as a form of a grant. There are some exceptions to that, of course, but I'll say generally speaking. And so I'm coming in today to talk about, you heard Chad talk earlier about municipal roads general permit and the requirements for municipalities that are involved with that. When later in the presentation, get to the funding side of it from our side of it. And then also transportation alternatives. We have a component that has stormwater related grants that are federally funded, larger in scale than your typical municipal roads general permit type projects. So there's a lot of words I understand. I'm just going to hit them real quick, but there is some important things here that part of 19 VSA section 38 requires that the agency take half of our transportation alternatives set aside and award half of that to this category of environmental mitigation and the other half to all of the other eligible categories in transportation alternatives. And I apologize, a lot of this is going to be somewhat repetitive of my budget testimony because it's all sort of tied up into the same thing here. So our transportation alternative set aside, which is a set aside of our formula funds. So you hear the agency talk about surface transportation block grant funding or STP funding or formula funding. Transportation alternatives just a set aside of that. It has a requirement that we grant that to municipalities through a competitive process. When IIJA passed, it increased that set aside to 4.3 million. It had historically been around 2.2 million for many years. And that 4.3 is set to increase just slightly for Vermont over the next few years. In addition to the 50% of that 4.3 going into this environmental mitigation category, the agency has also, for the last however many years since the inception of the Clean Water Bill, has added an additional 1.4 million into this TA municipal mitigation category. So we started about 2.2, half of that, 1.1 plus the 1.4, and it's flexed over time. But more recently, it's half of 4.3 and 1.4 going into this category. That's a lot of probably confusion. But the category that we use to determine eligibility comes from federal language, and it's this environmental mitigation activity, including pollution prevention, pollution abatement activities related to address stormwater management control, water pollution prevention, or abatement related to highway construction or due to highway work. The grants that make their way into the municipalities are 80% federally funded and 20% locally funded with a cash match requirement. Because they are federally funded, they require a full federal aid development process, resulting in about a 3 to 5 year duration from conceptual plans to actual construction. Just one thing that I did highlight previously in testimony is that when we get an application for scoping efforts, we typically fund those at 100% as long as they're eligible. So that basically sets municipality up for a future grant for that design and construction of that project. But they come out of that scoping effort with conceptual cost estimates, resource and utility identification and impacts, and then a preferred alternative is ultimately selected. Construction projects are awarded on their merits of the application. In this case, expected water quality benefits, equity, project management structure, and budget support at the local level. And they're done, those awards are made in consultation with Vermont DECs to ensure alignment with their goals of the clean water investments. These are just example projects that come out of the Transportation Alternatives Program. Some of these things you heard Jen Callahan talk about earlier. These are things that were early on in the inception of those permits, phosphorus control planning, flow restoration plans. We're not doing many of those now. A big highlight lately is sand and salt sheds. And then in those MS4 communities that Jen talked about, we do get applications for actual stormwater treatment, like gravel wetlands, underground storage, things like that. So we do a fair amount, and actually I get into a little bit of this later on, but we do a fair amount of large culvert replacements as part of this program as well. Just some numbers of, what we're providing to the municipalities under this program. In the fiscal years 19 through 23, that is this awarded number over here is sort of going back to that historical number of the TA set aside. Moving forward, the TA, transportation alternatives, and the municipal mitigation funding I talked about have been combined, and that's why you'll see that it jumped up to a $5 million award in 24, and that is the plan moving forward. So we're receiving, a number of applications, and in certain years it's 50% or better. One year we were able to meet all of the demand. Now the 47 projects that we've awarded over the last fiscal years, I did a breakdown: 17 sand and salt sheds, 15 culvert replacements or upgrades, 14 actual stormwater treatment practices, and 1 slope stabilization project. And these are example projects that are coming out of that program. And then I know that you've seen a lot of these before, but they are sort of the perfect pictures for what we're looking for. So on the left of the screen is Brandon. Those are considered rain gardens for stormwater treatment practice. The Pittsfield sand and salt shed. The upper right would be Brownington along the Willoughby River. It was a slope stabilization. The lower center is the Muddy Brook Culvert project that spans Williston and South Burlington. And then the bottom right, the town is escaping me, but I think that might be Fairhaven. And again, that's like a rain garden type stormwater treatment practice.
Representative Powell?
Thanks for showing us this. The culvert there, was that completely funded by this grant, or
Partially.
Partially funded?
Partially funded, yeah. And I don't have the numbers around me. It was a small portion, I believe. I remember right.
Expensive.
Yeah, it was done, I don't know, 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
Time goes fast.
So
So
it's been sort of stacked on.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Can I ask another
Please,
question?
your floor.
Yeah, I think our town, Heinsberg, I think we have the wherewithal to apply for these grants. I think it, adds to the workload, but it becomes worth it. And but I gotta guess a lot of smaller towns, may be challenged with doing the grants. I mean, if we look back at the years there in 23, you awarded 100% of them for 1.9 million. It just seems funny that that's all the grants that were applied for. And in other years, it's like 50, average 50% or something.
Yeah. Well, of course, remember some of these projects are regulatory and some of them are not. The regulatory projects are coming from those larger municipalities. And a lot of those projects are identified in those sort of master plans, the phosphorus control planning, the flow restoration plans, things like that. The smaller towns are typically applying for sand and salt sheds. They might have a stabilization project like Brownington, for example. We generally try to keep our application as simple as possible. We definitely sort of push towns to go through that scoping phase first and foremost. And that scoping application is simple. I mean, it's very simple. Describe your project, and if it's eligible, we're essentially going to give you the money. Those grants are like, $50,000 to $60,000 of federal funds with a 20% local match. They hire a consultant to engineering firm to help them in those efforts. And those are typically engineering firms that work with V-Trans quite often, all the time, I should say, I guess. So
with the RPCs.
The RPCs are also another asset to the towns when they're applying. So, I'll be honest, I don't hear from towns very often that this is a complicated process. It's nothing that we normally hear.
Thanks.
And what do you hear about the demand, or what do you know about, if we've done that many, how many more are out there? I mean, there are only X amount of towns, there's only X amount of municipalities and road crews, and at some point, do they all have the best salt shed that they should? At some point, some of these things we should get to the end of it, right? And there's only X amount of them. But I mean, how much more demand maybe is more my question. What more should we be?
I mean, I will say that the demand, I mean, this chart, I look at it now and I should take a look back at it. I do question the $1.9 million. I thought we gave a lot more in that particular year. The demand, I feel like has sort of stayed pretty steady with these programs over the years since 2000, I think first year, 2018 might be 1 year off the chart here, but generally speaking, the demand has been pretty steady, and we're awarding the majority of projects over the course. What this doesn't include is when we had those two programs broken out, transportation alternatives and missile mitigation, now they're combined. This doesn't consider that other additional funding, that 1.5 million that we were putting in. And then back in the early days of the clean water bill, that 1.5 was more like $8 million. I don't know. I'd have to look back. It was a lot more money back in those days. So we funded a lot of projects early, and they definitely have dipped a little bit as of lately.
Maybe I'm.
It's very.
Said we have one.
That is
Right? Is this what we're talking about right here? We talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
That particular piece.
Yeah.
I'm wondering where it shows up on our summary sheet in terms of the program for transportation alternatives.
Transportation alternative, I couldn't tell you the tab number off the top of my head, but it has its own individual tab.
Program development. It's along like the head transportation.
Well, I guess where I'm headed is
Five.
when we've talked about our effort to help towns and municipalities with their issues and their programs. Federal money that you're awarding out, or is it?
Correct. So true, the transportation alternatives,
It's not any, there's no state money involved in that.
not in that program.
All right.
Yeah.
We're not missing a piece where we talk about whether it's a flat fund scenario and whether we should or shouldn't be looking at sort of the effort that we're looking at with class twos and other pieces. That's not one of these
Right.
situations where we're not at that. Okay. This is all federal fund flowing to the municipalities.
Correct. And again, the TA set aside is required to make its way into eligible applicants, which in this state is generally municipalities.
Well, did they change the criteria? I know when they first rolled this out to make salt sheds eligible for this program, it seemed like there was an uphill barrier. None of them could qualify because of the rules and regulations around that. It seems like we're finding quite a few now.
Yeah, so this is the enabling legislation that comes through the TA program that allows us to fund sand and salt sheds. You don't see sand and salt shed in there, but Federal Highway has been flexible with us enough to allow us to continue to fund those projects.
Okay.
with this funding.
So the language is saying, because I remember being on the committee and it was
Yeah.
almost impossible to
And
fund one.
in addition to that, when we first were making those awards, we were limiting the amount to $50,000, and they had to be, forgot what it was, the sand and salt shed had to be within 50 feet of a water body.
Yeah.
We've relaxed those just to have, going back to the application, the merits of the application, as long as they can demonstrate a water quality benefit from the construction of their sand and salt shed, we generally it's eligible.
Okay, good.
And so, yeah.
Representative Lally?
Yeah, I'm
Coming
wondering,
back to
I'm
us
thinking in
sometime.
my town, our salt shed is located in a not the best location. I think this is common. So do towns run into problems on the A&R side with, having to mitigate because they're maybe in a wetland buffer or something like that, and there's no alternative location, and how I wonder if you could speak to some.
Well, I don't know if I could speak very well to the regulations. I don't know that sand and salt sheds are largely regulated at the municipal level. I think they're minimally regulated, if at all, besides things like wetland permitting and things like that. I will say that these grants are eligible for relocation of those facilities.
Okay,
And
that's-
we've had that happen multiple times with municipalities. So yeah, they could go through a scoping effort. And included in that scoping effort would be finding a suitable location within the town that, not too far from your existing municipal facilities and things like that, to find a location and then come back to us for a design and construction funded type grant.
Thanks, that's super helpful to know.
Representative Burke?
Yeah, I remember at some point, I don't know when it changed, we used to do after the allocation for stormwater issues, the remainder was supposed to be grants, be priority given to bike path. Do you remember that?
I didn't hear the last part.
Sorry,
That's in statute.
that's in statute.
That's in statute.
Still there.
Yeah, if you go back to the 19 VSA section 38,
Okay.
and I simplified it here, but it says 50% to this environmental category, 50% to the other eligible categories, which are historically been bike ped related projects. And it does say that the agency should include preferential weighting
Yeah.
for those bike ped
Remember
projects.
that, I didn't know if
Yeah.
at some point we got rid of it, because I just saw it.
No, it is still in,
Thank you.
in the statute.
I think Representative Thomas also had her hand up. No. Back over here, to Representative.
Yeah, just a question, we look at our budget on a page and we see it, the funding's gone up a little bit for this year, about $1 million. This is just formula funding?
TA is a set aside of formula funding. So it's has a specific use, has to go to TA, but it's considered a formula fund, I believe.
So the amount that we get from the federal government,
Is the number that's in my presentation. And the number that you're seeing on your budget sheet is what we are spending in this
in
next
this category.
fiscal year.
Okay, yeah. Right, because projects may overlap and it
Correct.
makes it look more. But again, back to the formula funding.
Yeah.
That just comes directly from the formula, there's no wiggle. If we had more projects or applied for more, we wouldn't get more.
No, we wouldn't get more, but as I mentioned, we, V-Trans, are proposing an additional $1.4 million that we're flexing into this category as well. So above and beyond that, so it's hard because we have this statute over here that says we're going to get 50% of this set aside. So take half of 4.3 million. That's what we're putting over here in this environmental mitigation category. We're also taking in another 1.4 million and adding it on top.
Of state funds.
Nope, of federal funds, of formula funds as well. For a total of, whatever that is, 3.6 million or so.
Yeah.
Annually that we're budgeting for awards. To award the projects, and then they become projects and then they get built into the budget.
Okay, and so here's the crux of my question there. Can we get more money? Is there any way, is there anything the state could do to get more of that federal money? That's it.
Not to my awareness, there is discretionary programs available now within federal highway. That, and I don't know the ins and outs of those, some of those programs municipalities are eligible for, some of them the state is eligible for, some of them are both. So those are like your, those raise grants and reconnecting community grants, things like that. So
We're getting these formula funds, and in this case, the state's added a little bit more, and they're
Well,
going to be.
it's almost 20%, Phil. That's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
It's not a little.
Yeah.
20% is a lot.
Representative House, I also add too, this committee's had policy decisions within that set aside. I'm bad with years, but to call like 6, 7 years ago, we directed 100% to clean water initiatives.
Yeah.
For a couple of years, and then we switched it back because we felt the towns were getting left out for the project, outside of clean water. So we can sort of direct it in that way. We could go back, make that 50% higher or lower. So there's wiggle room in that sense.
So transitioning now into state funded programs. And these programs are more related to what you heard Chad talk about earlier with the municipal roads general permit. So these two programs, you'll see them in your budget. Well, you won't see them in your budget. You'll see municipal mitigation program in your budget. It's a line item. These two programs are housed within that. There's better roads, municipal roads, grants and aid. These are both primarily clean water funded. There is a component within the better roads grants that are also transportation funded. So, and I know that Representative Lally asked last time how the Clean Water Fund is funded, and I didn't have a good answer, and so I did look that up. It's revenue from the meals and rooms tax, property transfer tax, clean water surcharge, and unclaimed bottle deposits, which equates to roughly $25 million in revenues per year. So
Thanks for finding that out.
So these two programs I've circled are largely intended to assist municipalities with their compliance with the MRGP and those practices that Chad spoke about. And I didn't know that he was going to be ahead of me, so I made this slide and I will just hit the highlights really quick here. But a lot of things that you heard earlier, the MRGP is it covers all 263 municipalities as of the most recent count. That's village and town mergers and things like that. It applies to class 1 through 4 town highways. And I did simplify the requirements because I want to make sure that the funding that we are providing is helping with the road erosion inventories and then the actual implementation of those practices that are inventoried or not inventoried, really. You heard Chad talk about hydrologically connected road segments. I'm sure you've heard me say that a few times. What they do is they go out and look at these segments for things like visible erosion. They look at the crown on the road. Is there a greater berm on the side of the road? Is there proper ditches installed? And then the turnouts or conveyance areas from those drainages, are they spreading out the water and not allowing for erosion to occur? And then based on all of these inputs, out comes that particular segment. Does it not meet? Does it partially meet? Does it fully meet? And it also identifies the high priority segments. Based on that, towns come to us for funding for implementation. And then the result of that is they go back out with this funding. They bring the road up to full standards by providing the proper crown, removing those shoulders, properly constructing ditches. And then part of the permit requirements are that each municipality has to address 7.5% of their non-compliance segments per year, of which 20% of them must be high priority segments. And by 2036, all segments should be compliant with the permit. And so the Better Roads program is a competitive grant program. Towns, give me Representative Power, sure.
Yeah, back to the municipal road general permit. So the overall purpose is reduce phosphorus, reduce runoff from the roads. But there seems that there's a huge benefit in that when you do this work, the maintenance for the road, the cost of that must be significantly less than, not doing it because obviously we're grading our roads, but when the culverts wash out and the sides of the roads have erosion and take away some driveways. Has there ever been any look at, hey, when you do these practices, not only are you getting those environmental benefits, you're getting, less maintenance.
There has been actually pretty significant into that through UVM in our research group. So there is documentation on that. I'll look up some links and provide that to you. I don't have any of that in here. I apologize, but we've partnered with UVM at least 2 or 3 times to look at things of that nature. Like what are the other co-benefits, as well as how long are these practices standing up? Sort of what you were going to earlier, those sorts of things. It's all within those research projects.
Okay, thank you.
So back to the Better Roads program. That's a competitive grant program done on an annual basis with 80% state funding, 20% local match. But in this case, a lot of the local match is done as in-kind services typically, because these small projects that towns largely are doing with their own public works forces. Some of the very small towns do put it out to bid. And just sort of a general breakdown of the numbers. On top, the chart is the road erosion inventories. So as Chad mentioned, the permit went through a rewrite in 23. And so as a follow-up in fiscal year 24, when that was happening, we did not provide any funding for road erosion inventories because it was undefined at the time. Last year, we awarded 101 out of 263 municipalities covered by the permit. We and we did that based on a formula. We found that I'll say around $20 or so per segment for a town to go out and inventory that, they're not spending a lot of time. They have an app on a tablet. They're going out there, they're looking at a 328-foot segment. They're putting in a few inputs, they're moving on to the next segment. And a lot of times those are done by RPCs. And so this funding usually makes its way into the RPC through the municipality to conduct those road erosion inventories. We do have a proposal in the next fiscal year's budget from the Clean Water Fund for an additional $750,000 to basically finish up these road erosion inventories. And then the lower chart is actual implementation projects. These are putting those ditching projects, culvert projects into place with an amount that we're awarding on an annual basis. And then the Municipal Roads Grants and Aid Program, that program is awarded based on a formula, based on a number of hydrologically connected road segments in comparison to other towns. Again, 80% state, 20% local match. And the participation started sort of low back in the day, and it's made its way up to about 230, mid 230s over the last few years. So we're 235 grants per year that we're giving out in this particular program. And then this data is sort of tracking actual costs associated with this work. I think Representative Pouch sort of asked about this earlier in testimony. And so this is what we are finding with our awards or our grants through the projects we're funding. Grants and aid, if you take the actual costs and look at it as an average cost per segment over the last 5 fiscal years, we're finding that's taking about $5,100 to bring that segment to compliance. In Better Roads, we don't have the depth of the data there, but we're getting around $6,100 of average cost. And so if you take the two, it's about $5,600 per segment finding to bring those segments into compliance with the MRGP. And I did look up some sort of fun facts. There's about 112,000 segments statewide that are considered hydrologically connected. And each town has about an average of 425. And you heard Chad say that initially when the MRGP was issued, it was assumed that about half of those segments were already within compliance with the permit.
And those segments are 300 meters, is that what it is?
They're 100 meters, 300, so 328 feet.
Yeah, okay.
If there's another question?
And just some representations of what these funds are getting. And I know they're not glorious to look at and they all look pretty similar, but these are good examples of what we expect and what we're trying to do. So, the other thing I wanted to just mention too, and
What happens if I set you back? Because those are at least 2 years old. What happens if I set you back and took a picture now?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I agree. And
For the larger projects, we heard in the earlier testimony of your colleagues that they have to go back and check them.
right,
And they have to go back and make sure they're being used and their maintenance required, et cetera. But
right.
with that whole discussion of as we're putting these in and they're not long-term tested, what do we do back to make sure that they're working or not working? And
So I think a large teller is active erosion is a big part of it. But, honestly, it's the permit that's driving this, the rewrite of it each year, the road erosion inventories, the requirement of that is what's requiring these towns to go back and say, all right, is it still working like it should? Or do I need to redo it, essentially?
Representative Coyle?
So the municipal, I just want to be clear, the municipal roads grants and aid program eligible, all municipalities eligible. So
Correct.
for instance, I have a community that does not have a class one road or a class two road, they're 3s and 4s, they still would be eligible?
They are eligible. They are not eligible for the class 4 because
Okay,
the permit only regulates gully erosion on class 4, which is just your gully erosion is defined as 1 foot deep and larger, and there's no implementation schedule for that. I don't think. So largely the class 3 road that you're talking about. And so what we do is we send out announcement, typically coming up here, March, April,
okay,
and then we provide a period of time, 6 to 8 weeks for the towns to send us back a letter of intent. Oh, and let me back up one step. With our announcement, there's an initial offer. And that offer is based on their pro rata share of hydrologically connected road segments. And if they choose to accept that offer, they send us back a letter of intent. And based on those letters of intent that we receive, we redo the numbers and we send out a final award letter and follow up with a grant agreement. And that award would only go up, not a tremendous amount, but a slight amount based on the participation. The grants are, I want to say they're $6,000 to $40,000. And I was just going to actually mention, so, this year in the clean water budget, if you look, VTrans portion of that clean water budget is 4.75 million out of 45.9. So that's 10% of the budget. I think I've heard 18% of the phosphorus for load in the lake is due to roads. But what this doesn't factor in is all the money that VTrans is putting into their roads and things like that. This is going out simply to municipalities and other local funding as well. And that's all I have.
Thank you for this, and I think those photos are beautiful, actually. So my question is, this is obviously, really valuable to towns for certain classes of roads. And I just think about all those private roads and private driveways and how did you share this information with towns so that this important information can trickle down to those areas that are not in VTrans or in municipalities' purview?
Yeah, so it
all works together, right?
right. I mean, we're prohibited from providing this funding to the private roads, of course, but we do have our Better Roads Manual, which is essentially a simplified version of the municipal road general permit requirements. I mean, it's technical, but it's technical, but it's simple too. It's meant to be read by a road foreman installing a ditch line and check dams and best management practices related to these sorts of things. Basically, getting the water off the road as quickly as you can in the event of a storm. So, I mean, that's one source that we have.
So there's so Better Roads.
Better Roads Manual. It's
Okay.
It's hosted on our website. Yep. And the only other, that comes to mind, there is some coordination with municipal roads and intersections of private roads and those sorts of things, but that's somewhat minimal for sure.
And my other question was, in terms of municipalities knowing about these grants, I know you've talked about the RPCs and this isn't just for these programs, but is there a central location for town managers to go to see what kinds of grants they can access? I mean, when I see grants for culverts, I think doesn't everybody want, I mean, there's so much need in the state, particularly after the flooding. So
excellent question. We have one resource called Show Me the Money Guide.
It's a good one.
I will I caveat that with that it's slightly outdated at this point, and we were actually I was in Senate earlier in this session providing testimony on it and acknowledged that it needed an update. And so we will be working on that soon. But generally, the information in there is largely accurate. Things have moved a little bit here and there, but.
is that also on the website?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I think if you just search VTrans Show Me the Money, it would come up.
Thank you.
It says, okay.
Yeah.
It's a great title.
And I will say also that I've had recent conversations with our contract administration group of also, so we host all of our grant solicitations on our website. We being V-Trans Municipal Assistance. But we've been working with our contract admin group, acknowledging that there's other opportunities outside of clean water, outside of, there's safety funds, there's NHTSA funds, there's all these things that are making their way ultimately into the municipalities. There really isn't a one-stop shop, but we've heard that and we are looking into it and working on that. So.
Anybody else? Maybe we'll have you email us to show the money to all the
Yeah.
house owners and whatnot.
Yeah.
Especially since we have 5 new. As soon as I saw the cover of it, I recognized it.
Yeah, I have it open all the time. I think it's very helpful.
Excellent.
Okay. Anybody else have anything else? Joel, thank you for coming back in. Very much appreciate it. I just want to make sure we're going to break at 11. We'll be back at 11:30. And at 11:30, we're going to read off on a high level overview of the bills on the wall. I'll present all the particular ones that you are highlighting, thinking that you're going to hear more about somewhere in the session. That doesn't preclude you from bringing up another one later, others that are still coming in, but we happen to have a change in the schedule. We haven't been through them yet, so we're going to do that. And then we'll be done before noon, and then we'll be back this afternoon. So